Hello and welcome to another edition of AP US History at University High School. We're just going to finish off some of the notes about the events leading up to the American Revolution. And we left off with that non-importation movement after the Townshend Act and the Massachusetts Circular Letter, which really increased tensions between the colonists and the British. And the British actually sent 4,000 troops to occupy Boston, which led to this event, a very infamous event called the Boston Massacre. So who created this image, this engraving? If you said Paul Revere, you'd be correct. The Boston silversmith, but he was also he also did these kinds of engravings, and he was kind of a jack of all trades. Also had a ton of kids as well. You can also go to his house still in Boston. It's on the what they call the Freedom Trail. You can walk it throughout the city. Okay, this building in the background here was where the colonial legislature met. Once this place became the United States of America, this became the State House of Massachusetts. I'll take you on a field trip there later on next week. So what do you notice about this image? Well, hopefully you notice some kind of bias in this thing, right? A whole lot of things are meant to portray the British as very villainous, right? First of all, nobody in the left-hand side seems to even be armed. People are bleeding. This guy's just gushing all over the place. This officer appears to be giving an order to fire, almost like they're on the battlefield. This is what British soldiers would do on the battlefield, right? Not only that, what's the building? What's the sign in the building above these redcoats? It's called Butcher's Hall, right? So, and then there's all sorts of things about this image that are symbolic that we don't have time to get into. And then even the cute little puppy, right, is on their side. In fact, it didn't really happen like this, and nobody really knows the accurate details. But right around, let's see, it would be over here is what is called Faneuil Hall. Faneuil Hall is this building, and you can visit Faneuil Hall as well in Boston today. But it was kind of like a town hall sort of meeting place. I don't know what kind of gatherings happened there, but it wasn't the seat of the government. Of course, this building was. So Faneuil Hall was kind of like where town hall meetings happened there, and this other church as well. What was the church? South Street Church, if I'm not mistaken, which is also on the Freedom Trail. Anyway, a group of probably Sons of Liberty. They came out of Faneuil Hall. They were probably pretty drunk. It was March, and there was some snow on the ground. It was March 5th in 1770, but the snow was already kind of it was old, and it was slushy and rough. If you have ever felt that kind of snow, and these rowdy colonists came out and saw a group of redcoats, and they started heckling them, and one of them, the rumor goes, took a handful of that slush and made a slush ball and chucked it at a redcoat, hitting him in the face. And then I don't know how some kind of brawl broke out, and a shot was fired. And when one shot was fired, people panicked, and many shots were fired. I don't remember exactly how many people died. I think it was only about 5 or something like that. And notice the names down here. The unhappy sufferers were, I don't know what that word is, but you've got names down here. This man Crispus Attucks is of particular note because he was black. He was a black man that died in the Boston Massacre. Notice there's no black man pictured here by Paul Revere. And if you read this stuff, it's very, I don't know, it's over the top. Unhappy Boston, see thy sons deplore, thy hallowed walks be smeared with guile and gore, or guiltless gore. So it's a poem, and it's pretty tough on the British. So this obviously is gonna raise tensions as well. The redcoats fired on British subjects. Here's Paul Revere. We've already looked at that painting. So these troops were a source of hostility for colonists. That's how they saw them, and these confrontations would spring up off and on in places like New York and Boston between colonists and British soldiers. Um, there was also a competition between jobs between British troops and townsmen. That was a source of conflict, and then that Boston Massacre, the confrontation between British soldiers and a crowd, left 5 dead. As a result, that's partly why the Townshend Act was the acts rather were actually repealed, and also they didn't succeed in raising much revenue through them. So how did we get from resistance, because again they still see themselves as British subjects, it's important for you to understand that, 1770, to open rebellion? Well, the Boston Massacre showed colonists that the British Redcoats, British military, was willing to fire on its own people, because these were its own people, right? These were British subjects. Um, and so in the early 1770s, many colonies formed what are called committees of correspondence. Correspondence meaning communication, right? Letters. And these committees were to share information about whatever it is they knew about maybe troop movements or possible laws that the Parliament was wanting to pass, or that colonial governors, of course, were appointed by the Crown, were wanting to do, some actions that they want to do. And they worked to shape public opinion against these acts of Parliament. But the key is that they're building this cooperation among the colonies, and things are starting to change, and a more national type of spirit is developing amongst these people, and the committees of correspondence really contributes to that. Parliament passed in 1773 a law that actually made tea, which was consumed in large amounts by Britons as well as their colonies. Made it cheaper. It made this new tax on tea was meant to save the British East India Company. It gave them a monopoly. The company was failing, and a lot of members of Parliament probably had stock in the British East India Company. So they made it so that the colonies could only purchase tea from this single company. And even though this act made tea cheaper, it infuriated colonists, and they met, I think, at Faneuil Hall, and they resolved to like turn away. I think initially they said they were going to turn away any British ships that had tea or something like that, and eventually, covertly, secretly, a group of them dressed as Indians decided that they were going to board some British East India Company ships and do some damage. So why would they do something like this, even though the tea is cheaper? Well, it just goes to show you how much they valued. We always go back to what they valued and who they were, what the culture was, how much they valued economic freedom. So even though this tea is cheaper, they're like, no, I want to be able to buy tea from whoever I want to buy tea from. So the violence didn't just happen in Boston with the Boston Tea Party. There was another one in New York. A ship loaded with tea was burned in Annapolis, that's in Maryland. A warehouse was burned in New Jersey. So the Tea Party contingent in Congress and throughout America that's where it gets its name. A lot of people apparently don't know that. So of course, back in the 1770s, that's what formed this national identity. It was basically opposition to taxes, right? It's a very American thing. It was like the foundation of the country, and that's what the Tea Party of today, that's their big platform, right? Opposition to increase in taxes. So here they are, colonists dressed up as Mohawk Indians, boarded the ship, smashed crates, dumped them into Boston Harbor, destroying the equivalent of probably many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of British East India Company property. Here's an image in your textbook. The British taxman is being tarred and feathered and forced to drink tea while the Boston Tea Party takes place in the background. This is a British cartoon, right? It's meant to show the savagery of the colonists. Here you've got people dumping, and I don't know why it looks like actual liquid tea, but whatever, dumping tea into Boston Harbor. The British official being tarred and feathered and humiliated. They're forcing him to drink tea, and they look pretty sinister, right? The colonists, they look pretty evil. So it's an English cartoon. And there was a song. The song was actually written by John Dickinson called "The Liberty Tree," and it was apparently there was a tree, I think, somewhere in Boston. I don't know, maybe not. And the song was just it became this pretty patriotic tune in the early 1770s that was sung by a lot of these people that call themselves patriots, and it was a well-known tune in the colonies, and it was kind of a cultural unity around it. Well, look what's hanging from the Liberty Tree. It was a noose. So this is how the British portrayed the colonist version of liberty, right? That it leads to a mob rule and lynchings. So in response to the Boston Tea Party, which destroyed British property, British East India Company property, and the violence that ensued in other cities throughout the colonies, the Parliament passed the most extreme political and military measures against the colonies, especially aimed at punishing Massachusetts, prohibited the loading and unloading of ships in Boston Harbor, basically shut down Boston Harbor. So what you need to see here is think of the values that these Americans had and the things that they considered part of their rights and freedoms. Going back to chapter 5, and we were talking about the culture of these colonies. Well, freedom, the economic freedom is obviously very, very big for them. Well, look, the Boston Harbor, the busiest port in the colonies, shut down. Political freedom, the fact that they had locally elected assemblies that could determine taxes and other affairs, well, they shut down the Massachusetts legislature. They annulled the Charter of Massachusetts. That is, they took away democracy. So all of these things that were near and dear, Parliament thought that they were punishing them and, go to the corner, don't do this again, when in fact this almost made it the point of no return for the colonists. It's like Parliament crossed the Rubicon, if you will. Legalized the housing of troops in private homes at public expense, terminated self-rule, meaning locally elected assemblies were no more. It's almost like they were instituting martial law. And then the Quebec Act, look up the Quebec Act, that was also part of the Intolerable Act. So these acts were meant to punish Massachusetts and strengthen the British, when in fact what it did is it convinced many colonists that there was no more reconciliation possible. So there are still probably the majority, more than 50%, do not favor independence in 1774. More than half do not favor independence. But a growing number, the radicals, see this as the end of their relationship with Great Britain. So as a result of that, though, even those that don't favor independence, they favor the creation of this thing called the Continental Congress, the first Continental Congress, which met in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. The delegates to this first Continental Congress were the most important leaders of the American cause. When we say the American cause, we're not talking about independence. Nobody's arguing, well, some people probably are, but the vast majority of them are not arguing independence. Instead, they want Parliament to repeal all those coercive acts. They want to be the ones to be able to determine whether taxes are levied against them, not Parliament from across the ocean. So they passed what are called the Declaration of Resolves. It asserted colonial rights. So it was just this document of principles, basically. It declared a bunch of acts of Parliament in violation of their rights. We see this word rights. Where are they getting these rights? Well, John Locke, right? Natural rights philosophy, that's from like the 1650s, I think, 17th century John Locke. And it pledged sanctions until the 13 Acts were repealed. With a sanction, it's kind of like a punishment. And what is this punishment? Total, complete boycotts of all British goods. And they would not export anything to Great Britain. We're talking about tobacco and wheat and indigo and things like this, and rice. No exports to Britain, and entirely boycott all British goods. This is pretty much like a break with Great Britain without an actual war, until they repeal all of those acts. To enforce this stuff, they further created more organizations. Remember the committees of correspondence? Well, they created these committees of observation and safety, meaning to make sure that the colonies themselves observe these sanctions against Great Britain. They also organized militias, so they're arming themselves. They're not necessarily wanting to go to war with the British, but because of the extreme measures they took with the coercive acts, which the colonists called intolerable acts, they formed these militias. And again, these are just average citizens that have arms, and they're going to be led by like a colonial militia captain. So you've got sometimes county, small militias in the counties, and other times larger uh, colonial militias, like South Carolina, Virginia, and so on and so forth. Um, and as these militias were forming, the British thought that was not a good idea, that all these colonists who were pretty worked up and angry have weapons, so they decided that it was their right, um, as you know, the overlords of the colonies, the rulers, to be able to seize those weapons. And that's what they tried to do. In Massachusetts, which is where the radicals were more in greater number, right? Um, there was a store of weapons that the British found out about that was out somewhere west, northwest of Boston, in the towns of Lexington and Concord. And they marched in the night to try to seize those weapons, but the colonists were roused from their sleep by a patriot, and we'll talk about that next week. But it led to this conflict. It wasn't a battle. I mean, I suppose you could say it was a battle, but shots were fired between the colonists and the British. The shot heard around the world at Lexington. So despite this stalemate between the British and the colonists in Massachusetts, the British decided on military action, and they were going to seize these weapons. When they left Boston to capture this ammunition at Concord, armed conflicts occurred at Lexington and Concord. The British found colonists awake in the middle of the night with weapons pointed at them, um, and shots were fired. The British were forced to retreat back to Boston. So redcoats fell in battle, some were killed, and they retreated back to Boston. King George III declared the colonies in open rebellion. The First Continental Congress did not see it that way. They were not at war. They didn't. This is still 1774 or 1775? Regardless, it's not 1776 yet. Nobody's arguing independence quite yet. But King George believes that they are in open rebellion. We'll leave it there for today, and then we'll pick it up next week. Thank you for coming. Come again next time.